Welcome to the 2020 DTS Arts Conference, or welcome back. I'm Dr. Reg Grant, Chair of the Department of Media Arts and Worship. And the DTS, just a little intro for the conference itself. The conference is designed to provide an opportunity for students to think critically about the integration of creativity and theology in the church and in the world. Why? Because stories are important. Because stories change the world. From the imaginative literature of Scheherazade and the stories she told over the course of 1,001 nights, to the children's story of a small mouse named Despero, imprisoned by the foul rat jailer Gregory, we learn the saving power of story. Just for fun, I'm going to read just a small cheese-sized bit from The Tale of Despero by Kate DiCamillo that will illustrate for us this principle of the saving power of story. Gregory, this rat jailer, blew out the candle where Despero was being held in a dungeon. And Gregory says, "We will now talk about your life and how Gregory will save it if you so desire." "Well, why would you save me?" Despero asked. "Have you saved the life of any other mice?" "Never," Gregory said. "Not one." "Well, why would you save me then?" "Because you, mouse, can tell a story," Gregory said. "Stories are light. Light is precious in a world so dark. Begin at the beginning. Tell Gregory a story. Make some light." And because Despero wanted very much to live, he said, "Once upon a time." "Yes," Gregory said happily. He raised his hand higher and then higher still until Despero's whiskers brushed against his leathery, time-worn ear. "Go on, mouse," said Gregory. "Tell Gregory a story." And it was in this way that Despero became the only mouse sent to the dungeon whom the rats did not reduce to a pile of bones and a piece of red thread. It was in this way that Despero was saved. Of course, in real life, stories have saving power as well. Prophet Nathan told David a story in 2 Samuel chapter 12. That story was the catalyst that changed the course of David's life and the life of Israel. Stories matter. The theme of our conference is how storytellers develop their projects. And today, Friday, we welcome a panel of faculty from the Department of Media Arts and Worship. Our guest host today is a recent graduate of DTS, Liz Rodriguez of Battle Creek Church, where she manages community groups and serves as co-host of the podcast Honest Conversations, along with Rebecca Carroll of KCBI. I'm on the panel, and I'm joined by three of my colleagues who I will let introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sandra Glahn. I'm the professor of Media Arts and Worship, and I'm a writer, editor, and founder of Aspire Productions.
Hi, my name is Tim Basselin, and I'm assistant professor of Media Arts and Worship, and I also work with our students in their apprenticeship that they do.
Hey, I'm Todd Agnew. I'm an adjunct professor in Media Arts and Worship. I'm a worship leader, pastor, preacher, singer, songwriter, and I'm hoping to start my PhD. I'm waiting to hear from you guys. So looking forward to that.
What a treat. Well, like Dr. Grant said, my name is Liz Rodriguez, and it is a privilege to be with y'all today. I'm so excited to engage in this conversation as someone who, like all of these people, consider themselves a storyteller. I'm excited to learn from their process. And so we'd love to start this conversation just with asking y'all if you could just look back at your development process. What have you learned about your process and the role of collaboration? We can kind of walk through the same order in which y'all introduced yourselves. Dr. Grant, if you wanted to go first.
There we go. The way that I start, and the most productive part of my creative process, it always begins in prayer. I think that the most creative ideas that I have ever received have been received as I'm immersing myself in the subject, whatever the subject might be that I'm working on at the time. I write a lot of first-person dramatic narratives, so I steep myself in the literature of the Bible, and I pray through the development of that character, and the Lord invariably gives me an angle, a way of approaching. And then I bounce it off of my wife. The collaborative part of it for me begins with a conversation with my wife, Lauren, and seeing if she's known me. We've been married close to 50 years. So I trust her. I trust her judgment. It's different than finding someone that just will give you a pat on the back and say, "Oh, it made me cry." It's what you want to know. You want to know why it made you cry. You want to know if the words work. You want to know if the scene unfolds naturally and believably. So that's how I approach the start of my creative process.
I think when I think chronologically about creativity and collaboration, my early publishing started because others were willing to collaborate with me and stick their names on projects as co's with me. And that opened doors in the early parts of publishing especially. And so that's been part of my joy as we turn the tables and now get to bring students in on some of my publishing projects and get their names on the projects. And it's not as humble as it sounds, because what that means is it's almost a form of discipleship, in that I have students who can get into geographic areas that I can't go into, ethnicities that I can't go into, all kinds of places and spaces that my voice wouldn't necessarily be heard. But as a result of collaborating with a variety of different people, older and younger, and new students and older students, it has meant that I could multiply my own ministry. And as a result, I've really seen that teaching is collaborating with a student's future. You're investing in their future and hoping that you help them improve their ministry, hopefully. But in your own way, you're multiplying your own ministry.
Yeah, a lot of my creative process and work has to do with collaborating with students as well. And so let me tell you a little bit about how that came to be inside of my heart. And when I first started working at DTS, the first year I came, I was able to go to a conference in New York City called the International Arts Movement Conference. And I got to sit down while I was there with Mako Fujimura. And I was asking him some questions. And one of the questions I asked was, how can the church have more artists in it? And his answer to me was that the church doesn't need more artists. And I was like, wait, what? Yeah, they do. But then he went on and said, artists are born. They're everywhere. We don't need more artists. What we need is curators. We need people who can create space for art in our churches, people who can fund art. And we also need theologians who can create theological spaces for art, and philosophers and such. And I left that meeting with this deep, deep sense of calling on my life, that's what I was called to do, was to help curate theological space for artists. And so I try to do that in the classroom, but another way that I do that quite a bit has to do with running the internships in our department. Shannon Reibenstein and I collaborate together in working with students and trying to listen to their calling from God, and we try to create spaces that students are able to bring their whole selves as artists that sometimes hasn't been given to them in the church. They've not been able to fully express, or not been able, it's been questioned whether or not that's a worthy calling or something to pursue. And we collaborate together, and in that collaboration, in that attempting to listen to what God has called them to, this really amazing thing often happens, where this dream that is inside the student that they've had to wrestle with, and they question, and they're not sure if it's their own voice or if it's God calling them, all of a sudden other people begin to see the dream because they're vulnerable with it and they trust us. And it becomes something that's outside of themselves, and it becomes more objective and not just a subjective thing. And we all begin to see it together, and the Holy Spirit shows up, and something begins to happen, and there's something tangible that begins to be made, to be created. And it's such an incredible privilege to be part of that, to participate in the happening that occurring.
Yeah, I learned a lot about my creative process when I was working on my THM at DTS, because I got stuck. I found I wasn't really creating much anymore, and so I started talking with a friend about it, and I found that my creative process is really long. I start studying and learning things, and then start sharing those things with people and getting, do you think this is right? Because I read this and it seems like this, but so we start having that conversation, and then I start kind of just saturating it in that for a long time, thinking about things, and then start trying to see what that looks like in life. If this is true, then how do I live? And it's usually about a year and a half later that I start actually creating from that space. And sitting down at DTS and talking with a friend, they were able to point out that I was learning so much at DTS that I wasn't ever getting past the first step. I was just learning and then turning around and learning something else, and then I realized that I was going to have to push things through my creative process, where the rest of my life it had always happened naturally. And since then, I've really realized that collaboration is really valuable in a lot of different parts of this. At DTS, I have the opportunity to have collaboration even in the studying, the learning part. The sharing part is a communal thing. The living it out is usually collaborating with very close friends and really family. Those are the people that they might not have been in a class, but they're watching me try to figure out how to live that life. My wife, my kids. But then creating, I was always a lone wolf. I was the guy that wrote the songs by myself in my room, recorded them with as small a group as possible, and didn't let anybody hear anything till it was all polished and finished. Because I wanted to control what people heard and how they reacted to that. And over the years, God's really shifted that in me, wanting to have different voices in that. As a musician, I love that. I love bringing in a different bass player, a different drummer, because it adds something different to what we're doing. And I'm realizing that even as the songwriter and all the different things that I do, having those different voices just makes the end product richer.
I love it because as a former student, I hear countless students and like old friends of mine sharing about how what they're saying is actually happened. I can't tell you how many of my girlfriends like walked alongside of Dr. Glahn in a writing process, or who I actually took soteriology with Todd. He probably doesn't remember it, but I do, with Kreider. And one day in class, Kreider like played one of his songs and totally like fangirled, and we got to hear about the process. And so it's just sweet to have these all of y'all just like talking about it, because collaboration is key in the journey. And so we love it. Kind of moving forward, what keeps you going? What fuels your storytelling projects? And I think the joy of where y'all are in this journey is you also get to say no. Some of the people we heard from yesterday, we have to say yes to everything because we're right at the beginning. But what fuels you? How do you know what to say yes to and what to say no to?
Oh, that's such a good question. The thing that keeps me going, besides the encouragement from my wife, she keeps coming up, doesn't she? Are people like Sandra Glahn and like Tim Basselin, like Todd Agnew. I mean, it's my close circle of colleagues and friends. People like Glenn Kreider, who keep me sharp for working collaboratively across divisions and across departments in disciplines that are not part of my immediate discipline, but that complement it. The quote from Scripture that I mentioned yesterday: "Every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow," is one that really governs my life, because, as any of my colleagues will tell you, one of the biggest words in my vocabulary is integration. It's seeing how the various disciplines that the Lord has orchestrated for us here at DTS complement one another, how I can learn from men like Bob Chisholm in Old Testament, how I can learn from the guys in New Testament, how I can learn from TS, from theological studies, and certainly from missions up there with us on the third floor of Todd, of Walford. It keeps things fresh, it keeps things exciting, it keeps things moving forward, and it doesn't let you grow stale. It keeps you motivated to keep reaching out and learning.
I'd say a number of things fuel my art. The first was probably pain. I think most artists, writers, songwriters will tell you that usually your greatest point of ministry has been your greatest point of pain. And so that was where a lot of my early publishing happened, was just telling my story and what I'd worked through. My husband and I had a 10-year journey through infertility and pregnancy loss that sent me back to Genesis, saying, why does God allow suffering? I wasn't very satisfied with some of the pat answers. And my favorite ended up being Job didn't get an answer. It's a mystery was actually my favorite answer. But so some of that was just, what have I had to wrestle with theologically, and what do I want to share? I think another thing that's really fueled my creativity is, what am I passionate about? What do I have to read? What should I be getting sleep over? And I just have to click on one more article about that topic. And often that intersects with where I see a need. So in 2017, I published a collaboration called Vindicating the Vixens, which was looking at different women in the Bible that had either been ignored or sexualized or vilified, I felt wrongly. And so we had men and women, different ethnicities, different geographic locations, re-looking at some of the women. This is not to say all women in the Bible are innocent. There, Jezebel, there are plenty of guilty. It's just that there were some that we felt the text didn't intend us to vilify. And so, for example, I was reading a dissertation by one of our grads, Sarah Bowler, on Bathsheba, re-looking at how that story is told and from what point of view that story is told. And it looks like the author is saying she's innocent in this situation. Another example was Lynn Koek's work, Dr. Lynn Koek's work on the woman at the well, and how first century backgrounds really suggest this is not a woman who has dumped a lot of men. She's widowed multiple times, probably. Women just didn't walk into a court of law over and over again. They had to have a male, sponsor, basically. And she's probably got to be a concubine, because otherwise she doesn't eat. So I was concerned with bringing these scholars to a place of need, which was people were asking, where are the women heroes of the Bible? Why are there only 2 or 3 of them? And so often my blog post for Bible.org will be because somebody sent me a message or I saw something on Twitter that I'm like, that is just not right. Let me go do the research and put it out there.
Well, I tend to think of my classroom as a creative space that I try to enter into. So, for example, I don't think I've ever taught a class that just had the same books from the last time. I always redevelop a class. I'm always bringing in new books. Part of that is new things that I want to explore with the students, but a good deal of it is me attempting to listen getting to know my students, trying to listen to them, what things they're wrestling with, bringing those things into the classroom and having discussion together where we don't necessarily know all the answers, but we're trying to explore it together and find and listen to what the Holy Spirit's speaking to each of us concerning different things. And obviously that, as I've already talked about with doing internships with students, oh my goodness, we have students that are dancers. We have students, I had a student this last spring that was doing an internship in heavy metal music. They constantly challenge me, draw new things out of me as I try to listen well to what God's doing in their hearts and try to walk that journey with them and participate in that with them. And I'll yield the rest of my time to the gentleman in pink. Sorry, I probably watched too much Senate confirmations this week.
I believe this is Peach.
Oh, my bad.
Yes.
My bad.
Thank you for the clarity. We appreciate it.
I kind of echo where Dr. Glahn started. I think I started writing out of pain and difficult areas. So I dealt a lot with shame and those kind of issues. But as a worship leader, it was, hey, this is where I am, but this is what I know to be true. This is who I know that you are, and somehow those two places meet. I wrote in that space for a long time, and honestly still do. But because of that, I don't talk about this very much, but I was really scared to get married because I said, what if I get happy and I can't write any good songs anymore? Yeah. And so that was a really interesting thing for me. And now I know that, hey, marriage is harder than anything I've ever done. I didn't need to be worried about that. But I did have to learn how to write a different kind of song, a different kind of process. So the fuel is still the same in a lot of ways, in that it's still scripture. It's still how I encounter God in my life. But it's a lot more connected now to an audience, whether that's someone listening to a song somewhere, whether it's a congregation at my church that I'm preaching for, whether it's a class, trying to say, hey, like Dr. Basselin was just talking about, what are their needs? What's going to serve that truth there? And as you guys talked about yesterday, funding. That's I turned a corner and left the record deal and those kind of things, and so recently I just started on Patreon, and so I kind of went back to that beginning step, but kind of for different reasons. In that I'm looking at, hey, here's a new environment that's actually it's a creative place for me. What can I do that's going to serve those people, and what can I share? And that's a new challenge right now.
That's so cool. I wrote down, when our passions and needs, when they collide, is when we find the fuel to keep going and to curate something that God is calling us to. I just want to be honest with y'all. This next question I'm asking really out of selfish motives. I, like they said, am part of a podcast. And so recently now when I walk into rooms, people think that I have some type of authority and accreditation. But in my head, I'm still the young 20-year-old who went to seminary and doesn't know anyone. And so would love y'all's thoughts on the imposter syndrome and being people who are further down. Is that something y'all still deal with? What does that look like in y'all's realms? And how do you keep motivated when projects take a long time, when projects aren't short and sweet, but rather it takes some time to finish, whether it's novels, screenplays, books, or research projects?
I don't know that I can address this question the way that you would like for me to, Liz, because I have the luxury of a full-time job. And a lot of the people that are there's no motivation like a contract, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
must finish.
yeah, you don't finish, you don't get paid. But when you're doing either what we sometimes call vanity projects or projects that are spec, that you just love and you want to invest your time in it, those are the projects that we usually don't have the luxury of entering into off the bat. We usually are doing commissioned work, so that people are hiring us for a particular project. My sons, both of them are filmmakers, and they're living in Brooklyn now, and they are making a living because the DOE, the Department of Education, has very, very deep pockets. And my son Gabe calls it soul-crushing work, because you go into a classroom, you set up a camera, you film it, and that's it. There is zero creativity about it. But you know what? It pays the bills. And it allows him and his brother, with whom he is a business partner, his brother Nick, rookproductions.com, if you're interested.
We'll take it.
It allows them to set aside money to do small film, like a scene from a film, like a trailer would work, and then market that to potential investors. So you take bite-sized chunks, you take small steps, and if you have a project that you believe in, to do 3 chapters of it, and then go to a conference, go to a literary conference, go to a book conference, and meet people. And once we get over this COVID craziness, shake a hand and say, here I am, this is my work, this is what I believe in, this is my passion, this is what I want to write. What do you think? And then take it back and rework it and stick with it. But you need to be, in order to make it last, in order to keep the engine going, you need to be writing your passion. Besides just writing to pay the bills, besides just doing Department of Education type of soul-crushing work to pay the bills, you need to be involved in doing something on the side that will keep you motivated. And that's how I got to the point now where I have the luxury of pretty much writing what I want to write, and then taking the time to find the market for it. I love doing it that way, because I can edit. Editing is my favorite part of the whole process. I can edit until I can edit until I find somebody that likes what I've edited, and then turn it over to them.
That's good.
Yeah, just to complement that, the flip side is you definitely need to be doing something that you're passionate about on the side. But early on, you can't be too good to take a project that isn't your passion. So in my early days, I don't often admit this publicly, but I worked for the music producer of Barney and Friends. And one of the things that I learned from Bob Singleton, here's a Grammy-nominated music producer, and on the side, he's writing jingles for American Airlines. And he wasn't, quote, too good at his art to do things that financed what he loved to do. And that was a good front row seat for me to see that it's a luxury to get to do what you're passionate about all the time. And sometimes if you want to eat, you have to take gigs that aren't your favorite thing. But most people work jobs where most of their job isn't doing what they're passionate about all the time. That's just life, life in terms of vocation. You have to do things you don't love. And so I do get to do mostly projects that I love now. But there is nothing quite so motivating as a deadline. And our seminary students know this too, right? A lot of biblical information we could learn online, but without a deadline, we're not going to. We're not, without somebody to grade our papers for us and tell us when they're due. We won't have the discipline to do that. So most of the time, a deadline is a really huge motivator. That's good, because a lot of times as an artist, we will keep tweaking forever. There's never that point where it's done, it's perfect. And a deadline makes you hit send and just live with it.
I wouldn't have graduated seminary without deadlines. Let's just be 100% honest. Yeah,
I definitely do struggle with imposter syndrome. to be honest with y'all, up until this morning, I was talking with people about whether or not I should be on this panel, because I wasn't sure what I had to bring, because I'm not a storyteller in the same way that my colleagues here are. I'm not currently doing a lot of projects outside of my work. And so I hope to be doing those someday, but I'm not currently doing that. But what keeps me pushing into my craft as a professor, and in other places, I do some writing on the side as a way of continuing that creativity in myself, is talking to the people around me. So I as I was struggling this week with whether or not even to be here today, I talked with Shannon Rivenstein about my insecurities, and I actually talked to Dr. Grant last night about it. And I've got a couple of other close friends in my life that I talked about it, and they all gave me different answers, which wasn't terribly helpful, but they helped me to see something that was outside of myself, that wasn't just a subjective. They helped me see the calling that I'm going after, that I'm trying to obey and to listen to, and that part of that obedience maybe was showing up today. So collaborating with the people around me that know me best, that can listen to what God they know the history, they know where God has spoken to me in the past, and they can remind me of those things when I'm not listening well to what God has said.
That was like such a good tidbit. I feel like we all need to write it down. Like, who in our lives is speaking and reminding us of what God has already done. So we're really glad that you said yes to being here today. Todd, what about you?
Imposter syndrome is real. It's not it's not discriminatory, and there's not a level that you leave it.
That's so comforting.
Yeah, just to encourage you. It's going to keep going. But I mean, I have this, daily, weekly of somebody that comes up, man, I really love Grace Like Rain. And always inside of me, I want to go, that song came out 17 years ago. And it makes me go, well, was that it? Did I already do what I was created for? And now I'm sliding down the charts until the end. And what encourages me in that is that doesn't fit the identity of my God.
That's good.
And because of that, I believe that he is continuing to do things, and I get to continue to be a part of them, and they might look different, but they're just as special to be a part of what he is doing. That is still just as big of a privilege, and so yeah, it doesn't look the same as it does for somebody else. It does as it did at a different time, but I'm getting to join God in what he's doing.
That's awesome. We only have a couple more minutes. These things always go by so fast. So as we kind of wrap up, just taking about a minute, if maybe 45 seconds, it's fine. What would you say to those of us joining you in this endeavor, to your students, to graduates who are starting to become storytellers? What advice would you give us all?
Oh, goodness. 45 seconds. Okay. Read widely and read well. If you're not reading in something outside of the Bible and theology, then you're not getting the full impact of everything that the seminary can offer you. You need to be reading in something outside your field, something that will challenge you, something that's creative, something that's imaginative, to keep those creative fires going. Read what Hendricks told me my first year as a student is read 15 minutes a day in something outside your discipline. And I started it and never stopped.
I would say keep in mind that small is beautiful. Sometimes we need to decrease our vision instead of increase our vision. That the numbers on Amazon or the number of hits don't validate us. Sometimes if we can find a really unsung hero and tell their story, it's a better story than finding a famous person to interview. And also, sometimes my writing students want to start out by writing for CT, and I want to say, write a devotional for your church, write a church newsletter. These are true ministries. Don't look down on them, and they're great for establishing credibility as well as part of the process. We wouldn't hire somebody to be a senior pastor of a large church without any ministry experience, and the same is true of writing. Typically, start small.
Maybe somewhat along those lines, I think a disciple is someone that doesn't have all the answers, doesn't have everything right. We're all disciples, and we're all still learning. And I think that in a lot of other spaces, a lot of other career paths, we've created spaces and ways for people to get their foot in the door, to start off, and to have kind of, they can fail, they can continue to learn. But sometimes we think that because we think of artists as like either they have it or they don't, we haven't created spaces for artists to fail. And we're trying to do that at DTS, where an artist can have a safe place to fail and to continue to learn and to be a disciple and to keep going. And artists that are out there, those spaces may not be available to you. We have to make them. Create them for yourself. Don't go with the expectation that either you've got it perfect or you don't have anything.
Yeah, and I would just say that no one can tell your story like you. And that doesn't necessarily mean your story like the story of your life, but the story that God has given you to tell. You might be writing a biography of Dr. Yarbrough. And it's his story, but it's your story. God has given you the vision, the passion for it. And he's done that for a reason. And your voice is going to tell that story in a way that no one else in the world can, no matter how accomplished, no matter how celebrated a voice that is. They cannot tell the story that you've been given the way you can. And so do it. And we'll look forward to reading them, to hearing them, to experiencing them.
Whoever writes that book about Dr. Yarbrough, they can just send it to me. I'll give you my address. I would read it too. What a treat. Thank you all so much for joining us. I think somewhere between reading for 15 minutes and starting small and creating spaces and telling the stories that we were created to tell, there's steps for us all to take as we move forward. So thank you all so much for joining us.